Hey everybody, welcome to this first edition of Spark Strategic Thinker. This is a weekly message to spark your mind. And I'm Dr. John Meis. I'm here with Heather Driscoll. How you doing, Heather?
I'm doing great, Dr. John. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I thought we'd start out by saying a little bit about Spark, who we are, what we do. And Spark's intention really is to help small dental groups get that consistency and reliability in reaching their goals.
I think that's a great idea. One of the things we hear often is, inconsistency really kind of kills performance. So the more consistent and predictable things become, certainly the better off everybody is in the long run.
So who we work with is ambitious practice owners. So these are the people that want to see their practice grow. They want to continue to improve, to better their best, people that really want to go for it. And that's the kind of people that are in it.
And what we do for those people really is create an environment where they can refocus their vision and really maximize the potential, their own individual potential, but also that highest level of leadership that's really ultimately going to help them to reach those professional goals.
What we see consistently in organizations like this is that as they grow, they run into periods where they feel isolated, where they feel like they just don't know what to do next. They're kind of tapped out of creativity. And when they have that and the complexity that goes along with that, their confidence begins to drop. And when their confidence drops, that's when people start to pull back on the reins on their growth and that inconsistency starts.
Definitely.
So we have a story about two practices that sold, and every group practice is going to sell at some point in the future. It may sell these owners to these owners within the group. It may sell from these owners to these owners and someone outside the group. There's always going to be a transaction. Nobody lives forever, and so these always are sold. And we think that if we run our practices as really sound businesses, we drive up value. We think there's no better way to drive up value than that. So I want to tell you a story of two groups that sold in 2017. One in South Carolina. It was a 5-practice group, and it sold for 3.5 times earnings, right? Very unusual in that it was lower than typical for some very good reasons. We also learned of a 5-practice group in Texas that sold for 19 times earnings. So what's the deal? It's kind of confusing, isn't it? And so when we saw this over and over in the transactions that we were following, in the transactions that we were involved in, we began to see some patterns as to why there was big variations in valuations. And so we developed the Dental Enterprise Value Matrix, and it really is just outlining what those drivers are that drive up value from practice to practice. We organize these things into 4 quadrants: the cultural, financial, process, and personnel. And when we looked at what made a big difference between one group's sales price and another, it always fell into one of these 4 quadrants. So let's talk about the cultural quadrant first, Heather.
All right. So certainly one of my favorite and can oftentimes be minimized in lots of different ways. What we find is that as small groups grow, sometimes their growth is really dependent on some kind of rock star performers, really, that have kind of perpetuated the performance and the growth, but not necessarily the best strategy for ongoing, consistent, profitable growth moving forward. So oftentimes we work with, certainly the CEO on their own individual skill sets, helping them really clarify and focus on what their mission and vision and values truly are, so that those can be defined and articulated and communicated throughout the organization. Oftentimes what we'll see is that the people who were kind of in it from the beginning are kind of good stewards of what they believe the culture should be. But as the organization continues to grow, if there isn't real clarity and definition on how we make decisions, how we hire, develop, and retain key team members, even clarity on how we're planning to grow, people kind of start to create their own plans, and sometimes those with the strongest voices win out, even if they aren't completely aligned with the vision of the original founder.
That's so true. And that's why having a strategic planning process is so important. It allows everyone to get clarity on where they're going, what their role is, what the timeline is. And that's one of the key things on getting that consistent growth, is having a great strategic plan. And part of that strategic plan is, what's the ownership structure look like? The ownership structure for most small groups changes over time, from usually a founder owner to founder and additional owners. And how that structure is created is so critical on the eventual value of the organization. It's such a critical piece. That one is one that we have seen several times be set up in a way to begin with that made a very, very difficult sale at the end. The next quadrant is the financial quadrant, Heather, and this is the one that everybody focuses on, isn't it? Because the biggest driver of enterprise value really is EBITDA. But there are other things in the financial quadrant that have a profound effect, isn't there?
Absolutely. And the one I would say that comes to mind for me really on a daily basis is just really meaningful data. The ability to manage and make decisions in a more unemotional environment really tends to be key. And so oftentimes I think the things that have potentially helped lead to growth can ultimately end up being a bit of a value detractor if you're not careful. And so having great transparency into everything from day-to-day operational performance, everything from, your individual doctor performance to your hygiene team performance, and then really overall, profit and loss statements and overall financial health and well-being. And then not just the clarity and transparency of reporting, but really making it so that the data is available to those who are leading, each of the locations each and every day. And do they understand the cause and effect and how what happens, at the practice level ultimately, transpires day after day, month after month, year after year, and whether we like it or not could ultimately end up having a pretty big impact on overall value of the enterprise.
Absolutely. And what can't be measured can't be managed very well. So those reporting structures are super important. Capsule structure, very, very important. As valuation methodologies evolve, as the organization grows, at some point that average cost of capital is going to be a significant piece of your valuation formula. So how is our capital structure set up? How is it set up for today? How is it set up to evolve as time goes on? Big items on driving enterprise value. Let's move to the process quadrant, Heather, and maybe this is one of your expertises. So why don't you talk us through this a little bit?
Yeah, it definitely wouldn't have started out as my area of expertise and really kind of had to be conditioned for myself as an individual because I tend to be a little bit more creative. And I think creativity is good as long as there's some way to make that repeatable, really, and predictable and consistent. And so the one thing we find with smaller group practices, again, is that they've had some really high performing people who ultimately have helped launch their performance. But what we haven't necessarily done quite so well is really document how they're doing it and really then, get that across to all of your locations. And so while I'm not a real big fan of, standardization just for the sake of standardization, anything that adds value to the patient experience or really creates a level of ease on hiring and onboarding of new team members and creating more predictability around patient care and outcomes, certainly that has a very positive impact on the overall organization. So everything really from how we answer the phone and schedule our patients and, how we maximize capacity in a practice, to really succession planning and ongoing retention of team members. Realistically, there should be at the very minimum, an aligned focus and plan on how these key processes take place. And even better, if it makes sense to have some form of documentation, checklists, scripts, all of those things come in very, very handy as you're trying to grow and scale.
As we identify processes in individual practice, we use a model called the practice success loop, which identifies the 12 really profit blockages that practices have. And we can, if we can have the right processes in those 12 areas, we know we can drive profitability up, we can drive consistency up, and we can drive the patient retention and team retention up just by having a well-oiled machine. And the personnel quadrant, Heather, always the most challenging, isn't it?
Absolutely. And so I think oftentimes, small groups, again, are created with usually just a lot of good intention and some grit, right? And then as things start to grow, it's really important to start developing that key leadership team, the management team, really defining who's responsible for what, and ultimately, how are they going to have the bandwidth to keep up with the growth? We're lucky to work with all kinds of great dental groups, and I would say one of the key elements that can stifle growth really is the ability to have great team members and leadership. Really, we oftentimes say, there's lots of dental practices to be bought, and they're certainly easier to buy than they are to run. And so just making sure that you have a consistent approach to attracting the right people and retaining the right people. And then once you have them on board, just making sure that they have really clear development paths. I think more often than not, really great people are looking for opportunity. And if they can see through your strategic plan and your focus areas that their future can be really bright with you, oftentimes you'll get some really great talent at a smaller level just because they're excited and interested in being a part of a growing organization. But all of that has to be really clear. Maybe not each individual step as to how you're going to get there, but the idea and the vision is very attractive to high-performing people.
Yep. And how do we continue to raise the capabilities of all the people that are in our personnel quadrant?
Yes.
We've seen practices that really outgrew the management team because the practice was growing rapidly, but the capabilities, skills, knowledge, and wisdom of the people working there weren't growing. And so some of the leaders, the organization really left them behind. So how do we set this up so that we prevent that from happening? So we've seen, this is a chart from the Riley databases, and this is showing historical U.S. middle market M&A activity. This is general markets. This isn't just in dentistry, right. But it's showing the ups and downs of valuations based on a multiple of earnings. And so you can see that this goes up and down with the market, goes up and down with interest rates, goes up and down with many factors. And some of those factors are under our control and some of those factors aren't. And so when we look at valuation escalation, we look at some of the things that we talked about on this enterprise value matrix. And you can see that each one of these can have an effect, a significant effect on the multiple of earnings that's gotten at the time of sale. And even if your organization isn't being positioned to sale, or if you don't have a sale in mind, even in the next 5 or 10 years, building your organization so it has better value creates a better business, creates more EBITDA. It's what you should be doing anyway, even if you don't have a sale in the near future.
Absolutely. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but all of those, all of those elements, if done well, can certainly be positive to valuation multipliers. But unfortunately, the reverse is true as well. So something decisions made today, thinking it makes sense for the size you're at now. Ultimately, sometimes when extrapolated out over 5, 10, 15 locations, those decisions don't always make sense. And if you're not careful, those really good intentioned decisions can ultimately have a negative impact, down the road. So.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Well, thanks, Heather. I hope everybody enjoyed this first episode of The Strategic Thinker. We'll be with you every week, and I hope you get some really good things out of this. I hope it changes the way that you are thinking and really sparks your mind. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.